Okay, so what's happening now is my attempt to make things simple, and this is the beginning of what could be called an approach of while we can and from now on. So the main issue I see facing the human race now is one that I just call Northern Hemisphere methane ignition. And what we have is we have the northern hemisphere of the Earth. And this has Canada, which kind of goes into Alaska, goes around over here, comes into the United States, more or less, a little bit of Greenland over here, and the North Pole. Now, this is now the melting North Pole. And the basic nations that we're familiar with that make up the Northern Hemisphere, we could say we have Canada, and we have Siberia, which is really a part of what we could call Russia. We have Mongolia, which could be called China. And we have the United States with what could be called Alaska. Now, what's happening with this is we have an issue of what could be called ignition. Now, what we have here is something called permafrost, which is decaying. And beneath the permafrost is maybe a mile or more in some places of organic methane drenched material. Now, if, for instance, in a situation of political unrest brought about by our melting North Pole and our wind speed going up and all the other issues going on, as well as a few other things, if a nuclear weapon, or several of them, were fired by one of the parties involved into this area, and you had a nuclear explosion of significant size in this area, or maybe one or more, what you could have is a situation of methane ignition. And what could happen is a raging wildfire could overcome very large areas of the Northern Hemisphere. Okay, so I will put that aside for now. to solve that problem. Okay, so what I believe is we need our technical document. And another name for the technical document could be the internet. But all things require these technical documents so that they can be explained. These are like the instructions or the diagrams or whatever you want. The reason that we need a legible technical document on our mobile devices and the rest of it is because we have an issue of American executive action. And so right now, for a little while longer, American executive action is important. But unfortunately, what we have in the United States right now is we have an issue of our dumb and dumber presidential choice situation. And I'll just basically make it pretty straightforward. Hillary is rather dumb in many ways, but Mr. Trump is even dumber. And what's really going on here is what's happening in the next 4 years. So let's say that weather change is one issue, but in the issue of political instability and in the issue of other things, I'm just going to use Moore's law as kind of a way of diagramming this. And it's rough. Let's not say it's not necessarily that accurate. But what happens is, this is what we have now. In 18 months, it will double. In 18 months after that, it will double again. And by the time 4 years rolls around, what was this becomes this. And also along for the ride is what we could call the 1 degree aggregate. And the 1 degree aggregate is a situation where, for instance, the difference between non-boiling and boiling water could be 1 degree. The difference between freezing and non-freezing water could be 1 degree. A 1 degree aggregate means not just water, but methane, water, all manner of things, all kind of mixed together and doing things. We don't really know what that's going to do. Let's just kind of call it a volatile mixture. Anyway, this is what we're going to have 4 years from now. And this means that before the election, 4 years from now, we'll have this and maybe this and a whole bunch of other things to manage. And so what's happening with that is we have a very simple issue from now on of while we can, and then from now on. Meaning that this stuff isn't going backwards. It can't go backwards. It never is going to go backwards. So while we can, from now on, we have this issue of managing this. This is really an issue of management. And we have this issue of American executive action. So this, I'm just making this clear just because basically this is what's kind of in front of us. We have now our northern hemisphere methane ignition, which is right there, and then we have our technical document while we can and from now on. And so then what can we be doing with the technical document is we could probably be explaining, for instance, a difference between what could be called green economy, which is inevitable, being is that these technologies are evolving very quickly, all of them, whether they're used by the military-industrial complex or whether they're used by the green complex or this complex or that complex. What we have is solar panels and batteries and a few other things that are just 3D printers. Let's see, a bunch of stuff that's just basically going to keep evolving. And then we have our finance paradigm. So the difference is green economy and finance paradigm. Okay, the finance paradigm is going to be kind of tough to maintain because of something called surface architecture. And what surface architecture is that everything is becoming flat and very easy to deal with, lightweight and flat. So that could be solar panels, that could be batteries, that could be, lighting units, they could be heating units, they could be touchscreen information management devices, they could be all manner of things. Oops, I would do that wrong. But anyway, just think flat and very inexpensive and basically capable of lasting a long time. Okay, that means that's going to be working in transportation, that's going to be working in home utilitarianism, that's going to be working in transportation, basically utilities, energy, transportation, building products. All of these things are going to be subject to what could be called this new paradigm or this new arrangement of what could be called surface architecture, which is basically cheap, super cheap. Okay, so I'm going to just decorate my surfaces. Now, these may be used to hold holograms later, but for a while we're just going to basically have this. This is very super inexpensive. So what I'm wondering is, where are these guys going to make their money? Or how are they going to support their money if this is true, also subject to Moore's law, doubling every 18 months? And it really has no relationship to what finance has so far been built on. So we're going to have this green economy, surface architecture, finance paradigm issue to deal with, while we can and from now on. That's part of it. I'll just put obsolete above this. So again, we have to be wondering, well, why isn't the technical document being used to help explain this to people so that they can prepare themselves for having more or less an obsolete relationship with finance? Now, what will be interesting is if finance attempts to maintain the relationship, thus being rather mean to a bunch of people, or if the relationship, the financial kind of arrangement, is adapted to this issue of cheap, long-lasting, ever more efficient materials and architecture. Anyway, so that's like kind of, well, that's called a drawing. Anyway, so what's happening is we now have our northern hemisphere methane ignition problem, which is heading our way and isn't going to go away. We have, while we can and from now on, we have this issue of solving this and this with a technical document that should be used to celebrate, I suppose, the evolution, inevitable evolution of this, as well as the inevitable development of that, in this very simple to maintain, very, we could call it practical surface architecture relationship, which renders the finance paradigm more or less obsolete, which is why this is still happening. So now, why isn't this working better? It's because of our gaming and our storytelling that basically occupies most of our attention. So I just call this fictional galaxies. And in the land of fictional galaxies, what we have is I have created a depictional presidential candidate. And the depictional presidential candidate is a fellow named Manoj Collage. And Manoj Collage, well, he was a depiction of a normal person who was trying to make a phone call, but ran into a reality augmentation prototype. And so what happened is he more or less ended up on a spaceship called the Kathmandu. And the Kathmandu is a spaceship that's a combination of the Yellow Submarine and the Starship Enterprise, and it looks like a cat. Okay? Now, that makes sense, right? And the Kathmandu kind of is in a universe of sort of Yellow Submarine, Peter Max, Milton Glaser kind of Falloon stuff, but it, there it is. So, anyhow, this is typical of what people spend their attention on while they should be solving problems like Northern Hemisphere ignition, is that they're basically spending a great deal of their time gaming and spending time with fictional galaxy kind of stuff. Things that never happen, things that probably never will happen. I don't think this is ever going to really be a part of space travel, but it might. Let's see. So anyway, this poor guy, this character, this depictional presidential candidate, well, there's a problem. The holodeck has been kind of connected to the replicator, which has been kind of connected to the transporter, which has been connected to kind of reality augmentation, virtual reality thing, which has been kind of connected to a bunch of other stuff. And this is what happened with his phone prototype. He got thrust into this situation. Now he's looking for actual Earth and hopes to, in a sense, influence the election. Okay, he's hoping that maybe he can become capable of preventing Northern Hemisphere ignition. Okay, so while the Kathmandu is bopping around fictional galaxies, attempting to do that, find actual Earth, what happens is these poor people run into what could be called a paradigm problem about the nature of the reality paradigm, which is kind of subject to the Penrose concept. And the Penrose concept is like this cube which I'm drawing here, which really can't exist, unfortunately. So it does things like this, I guess. Anyway, so that's part of the problem. And fighting over this are the battlecrafters. And the battlecrafters look like cowboys, or maybe Indians, and astronauts, and kind of goth, medieval, kind of swords and shields kind of people. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of these people, or depictions, and they come kind of beaming into the situation with their, stuff, arguing over this, which is maybe an issue of depiction, right? Having to do with issues of what could be called gaming. And another thing that I call gaming, I call it this, is what could be called contemporization, which is our issues of arguing over a depiction of now. Okay, so let me do this. Now, you don't need fictional galaxies. You could have any number of fictional scenarios and argue over them. You can make those your paradigm if you want, but this is the one I'm using. We really only have a few years left before we have some real problems. If drones are flying around with little flares crashing into the permafrost because crazy people like doing that kind of thing, a few years from now, we're going to have a real problem. So we have to have a responsible use of language. And so we'll leave that up to the next video, which may be a study of branding. Branding is important. And so, there we go. That's kind of cute. Let's see. So, now, so I'm going to run through this real quick. We have our technical document. Okay. This is what we're trying to avoid. Northern Hemisphere methonated ignition. Bam. Okay, we don't want to have any of this. These are the people who are involved. This is what we have to work with, a technical document called the internet, a few other things. This is how fast it's moving. This is what's going to happen in 4 years or less. This is what we got. We got Dumb and Dumber. This is what we want to avoid. You don't want to do dumber if you can just do dumb. And we have this issue of American executive action. Then we have this inevitability of green economy, surface architecture, and an obsolete finance paradigm. And then we have what we're wasting our time on, which we're not solving the problem with our technical document. We're spending our time in fictional galaxies. So with fictional galaxies, we have an issue of contemporization, which is our depiction of now, and we're right back to the issue of while we can from now on. And so that's about it, except for the part where these are original pieces of art and they're on sale for $100 each. So if anybody wants to buy one of these guys, that's what these guys are. They're $100 of each, because you know how it is with this financial paradigm. A person has to be able to make a living.